There are 5 main tools that I use in my retouching, and they are the spot healing brush patch tool, brush, and the clone stamp tool. It shouldn't be so that you use one same tool for everything just because you're familiar with it. These tools are designed for different tasks, and you will definitely get better results by using them to solve the problems that they are made for. I use the brush tool to paint in pixels, for example, to add some eyelashes or fill in the eyebrows, or when I'm working with layer masks. I always change the type of the brush and opacity depending on what surface and texture I'm working on. The clone stamp tool simply copies pixels from the source area to the destination area. You need to hold Alt to sample and then apply those pixels in simple brush strokes. You can also change the type of the brush and opacity depending on what surface you're working on. The healing brush tool is similar to the clone stamp tool in the way you also need to hold Alt to sample your source pixels. The only difference is that it copies the texture and leaves it intact, but it adjusts colors and tones in the destination area so that it becomes more like a mixture of both the source and the destination area's colors and tones. The main difference between the healing brush and the spot healing brush is that you don't need to sample when working with the spot healing brush. It automatically samples from the texture and tones from the areas around it, and all you need to do is simply touch a blemish or a spot for it to disappear. I know that many photographers and retouchers find this tool useless, but I actually think it's great when used properly. Remember that when retouching skin, keep it set to proximity match. Create texture and content to where it can actually work against you, and also keep spacing set to 1% when working with the spot healing brush or the healing brush tool. The patch tool is very different from the rest of the retouching tools. It works as the healing brush in a way only you're applying your sampled pixels in patches. Try both the source and the destination settings to figure out which one works best for you. They ultimately do the same thing and are only different in the way you sample your patches. Now, let's see how I actually work with these tools. When I get down to retouching a portrait, I start with the skin, and the spot healing brush will be the first tool that I pick up. I always work on a new layer, and I make sure that it's set to sample all layers and proximity match, and I target the most visible blemishes and spots that sit right in the middle of the skin or the background, and work with a very small brush and just go over the face and the background, and when I'm done with those, I move on to the healing brush. With the healing brush, I work on the little blemishes that sit closer to the areas with contrast colors, much darker or much brighter, or little hair that crosses the skin. And when I get closer to the areas where I actually can't allow any bleeding of colors into each other or smudging colors, that's when I move on to the clone stamp tool. Let's see any areas that we could, yes, for example, this little it looks like it's an eyelash that catches on the light, and if I start using the healing brush right here or a spot healing brush, it will just smudge all the colors, and all the colors will bleed into each other. So this is exactly the situation where the clone stamp tool would be the ideal tool for retouching. And again, I make sure that it's set on all layers, maybe a little bit harder, higher opacity, cover it up, and move on to the next tool, which will be the patch tool. To use the patch tool, you need to have the actual layer with pixels selected. It's the only retouching tool that will not work on the new layer. To duplicate your working layer, you can press Command J and then choose the setting that you prefer. I prefer destination, and select the patch of the good skin and drag it over the skin that you're trying to cover up or fix. I usually use the patch tool on the body or on the neck, but not as much on the face. So as you can see, the healing brush tools are ideal for working on skin and gradient backgrounds, and the clone stamp tool is irreplaceable when it comes down to working on texture or the areas where different colors meet and you can't allow them to smear into each other. Remember to zoom in very close and keep the size of your tools just slightly larger than the blemishes you're working on.